Thank
Okay,
you
it's all
very much.
yours.
I appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay, so hopefully everyone sees a picture of my lovely library.
Yep.
So I am Melissa Davis. I feel like talking with this group is coming home. I grew up in Arlington. I was a Nottingham, Williamsburg, would have been a Yorktown girl, but my dad retired and we moved away. But I grew up on Ottawa Street just off of 35th, and we used to walk up to Miners Hill and down to High's for ice cream or Frank's Pizza for a slice of pizza. Um, I have great memories of growing up there in the 60s into the 70s, before 66, before the Metro, back when. And so I'm really glad to be able to talk with everyone today. I have been here at the Marshall Foundation for a little over 6 years. I love it. I grew up loving history, and this is absolutely the best place to be a librarian if you love history. I tell people I'm the happiest librarian in the world, because there's just no end to the learning at the foundation here, and I think I like that most of all. Um, my husband retired from the military. We still live in Virginia. We live down in Rockbridge County, and he's a teacher, and I'm the librarian archivist here. For the first 4.5 years I was here, I was the only member of the library staff, and it was a little overwhelming at times. But I was able to hire a half-time librarian. Her name is Tangia Tasnam, and she isn't here today, but she'll be here tomorrow. And she's been handling a lot of the reference questions, a lot of the people seeking information, as I've been working on this digitization project that I'm going to talk to you about today. So I wanted to introduce you to our library. We have about 30,000 books. Um, the vast majority are out of print, and so that makes them valuable to researchers, but not really monetarily valuable. Um, and and we have a beautiful reading room in the library, as you can see from the picture. If you see the big table in the middle of the floor, that actually was Marshall's map table in his larger Pentagon office. He moved into the Pentagon in late 42, just as it was being finished. And he was able to use this table as a conference room table. It actually belonged to General Phil Sheridan. When the War Department built their new building, which is the Eisenhower building now across from the White House, um, that this was part of the suite of furniture. And General Sheridan was rather short, about 5'4", and he was cavalry, and he wanted everyone to know that Cav was the best. And so, even as General of the Armies in the War Department, he wore his gold spurs to work every day. And you can literally see where he sat at this desk of his, because he parked his spurs on the leg of the desk, and you can see the marks from his spurs there. So it's a beautiful piece of furniture, but it's also an artifact in the library. And we have a three-story archives. If you look at the end of the picture, you can see the bank vault door that protects our archives. It's literally a building within a building. We have over 500 collections, papers, photos, audio, video, posters, maps, you name it, we have it. And the flagship collection of the Marshall Papers, of course, the papers of George C. Marshall from his professional career. The government started collecting his papers in 1938 when he joined General Headquarters of the War Department, and through the end of his life, including his retirement, until he died in 1959. We also have family papers that the family has given us from earlier years in his life. And we have the other collections, which some are big, some are small, but they're all connected in time and place to Marshall. So we're looking really at about 1900 till about 1960 are the years covered by the collections here. And so you can see part of the Marshall papers right there in the archive boxes, available to research. Um, I love our vault. People think it's really cool to come and get to visit it, because you open the bank vault door and there are all these shelves of papers and everything. Um, so who is George Marshall? People, if I held up a picture in front of a crowd of Eisenhower and Marshall, everyone would know Eisenhower because he was president after he was General Eisenhower. Um, the vast majority of people are not really sure who General Marshall is. A lot of people will say, oh, he looks like my grandpa. And so teaching people a little bit about who General Marshall was is important. The three pictures here show three parts of his career. The first one is General Marshall, Chief of Staff of the Army during World War II. The middle one is Secretary of State Marshall, working on helping the recovery of Europe after World War II. And the one on the right is Secretary of Defense Marshall, who was called by Truman back from retirement to rebuild an army that was going to be fighting in Korea. In addition to these three very large, important jobs, he also spent a year after World War II in China trying to broker peace between the communists and the nationalists at the behest of President Truman. He served as the chairman of the Battle Monuments Commission for several years. He spent a year spearheading the recovery efforts of the American Red Cross after the war. How did they fit? What would their peacetime jobs be? And then he was called back one more time as Secretary of Defense. So no one has ever done all of these jobs in a professional life. So President Truman, before he left office, decided that Marshall's papers should not be collected at the National Archives, which is where the vast majority of government papers go. But instead, they should be collected in a foundation bearing his name and create a research library, because the opportunities for research would be much greater if the collection were kept together. Of course, collections that go to the National Archives are not kept together. They're separated out into record groups that are rather longitudinal. So this was a way of keeping Marshall's entire career in one place. And so he directed the government agencies that contained his papers to bring them to, send them to the foundation. Now, the War Department / Department of Defense said, oh, absolutely, and said here, and gave us everything they had. Personal correspondence from the time, government papers, a lot of things that came here at the time in the 50s and the 60s were still classified. And so they had to be kept under lock and key and could only be looked at by people with the security clearance necessary. The American Red Cross was very forthcoming. A lot of private citizens who had been part of government gave us copies of what they had. The only ones who were a little hesitant were the State Department, and the State Department only sent his personal correspondence. I do not know where the rest of the papers went. I assume they went to the National Archives, which really wasn't what President Truman had in mind. But people are really disappointed when they find out that I don't have the robust post-war collection that I have from the war collection. That's one sadness in the collection. But the collection as it is over 250 of those archival boxes. We think there's about 250,000 pieces of paper and probably about 170,000 documents. And you'll see why I'm telling you these numbers as we get into the presentation. So the land that the foundation building is on was donated by the Virginia Military Institute here in Lexington. The building was dedicated in 1964. You can see the original little tiny bushes and how big the bushes have gotten in the intervening time on the right, more current picture of the building. We are a completely private nonprofit. We do not receive support from VMI, the state of Virginia. We're not part of the presidential libraries, National Archives, any of that. So we are strictly supported by private donations and by grants. And that's how we exist. We are surrounded by VMI and Washington Lee. I can see their library if I look out my library window. So we have, within 5 miles of where I'm sitting right now, over 6,000 undergraduates. And so the preponderance of primary sources and the hard to find secondary sources that we have are of great value to the students in the area. This is part of the Marshall Papers collection. You'll see that there's one box there that's dark gray. And the reason it's a different color is very important. Several years ago, the Lexington Fire Department came and said, now, if there's a fire in the building and we can get into the vault, what are 2 things you need us to save? And I said one thing was the last Corps level D-Day map in existence. And the other thing was the original reading copy of the Marshall Plan speech. And so we put it in that dark gray box because it's really easy to find. If in an emergency someone had to grab specific things out of the vault to protect them, it would be easier to find. So that's why the one box is gray. We do have an active and busy library. We have, like I said, undergraduates come in here and study. This fall, there was a class taught at VMI strictly about George Marshall for the entire semester. They used the biography written several years ago by David Rohl, and they met in the library for class every Wednesday, using the resources that we have here as they worked on their semester-long papers. And it was absolutely delightful to have them in here every week. During the academic year, I'm also open till 10 o'clock in the evening on Tuesdays, which makes it possible for community and students to come in and use the facilities here who would find it really difficult to get here during the day. The undergraduates, especially at VMI, the cadets are so incredibly busy. It's really hard to get here to do research during the day. Outside of students, we also have professional researchers who come and visit. You'll notice that they're very good. I don't mind having food and drink in the library, but they can't have it on the research surface. So you'll see the water bottle sitting on the floor next to the young lady. But we are not in Northern Virginia. We are not contiguous to a large airport like Dulles or a big train station like Union Station. So it does make us harder to get to. We don't have the preponderance of researchers that you might find at an organization that's easier to get to from the Delmarva area. People ask me, why didn't they put the foundation at his house in Leesburg at Dodona? And the answer is because the family was still living there when the foundation was started. So it wouldn't be an appropriate location. So that's why we're in Lexington, and we do recognize that we're a little harder to get to than some of the other research facilities that you find in the metropolitan area up there. We have had an online presence for a while. Since about 2007. They started a rudimentary library catalog. This is a screenshot of the old catalog records. They're not the worst in the world, but they're certainly not as helpful as they could be. You can get a gist of what the document is. You can open a Word document in a separate window. But this is what we had when I got here. And when COVID came and everything shut down, it really was a wake-up call, I think, to our board that while people could visit, we are viable. But when people can't visit, what do we have to offer? And to be perfectly frank, this particular catalog is not very much to offer. And so the conversation began in 2019, continued into 2020, and the digitization of the flagship Marshall papers became one of the pillars of the new plan, the 5-year plan that the foundation board was putting together. That the best way to keep Marshall viable, the best way to take him out to the world is to make his papers available in a way that's more accessible and more informative than what we had. And keep in mind, the documents that we had in the catalog were less than 1% of the overall collection. The vast majority were documents that were selected for the 7-volume Papers of George Marshall publication that Johns Hopkins did over the period of years. So we have just a tiny percentage of the papers in the collection, and this is not a very enlightening record. So digitization. Digitization requires very expensive equipment and specific kind of setting. So this is a picture of a digitization setup at Backstage Library Works in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You can see that there is the flatbed scanner. You can see the side lights. You can see the fan. Temperature control for this equipment is very important. So it has its own air handling unit. The paint on the walls is a non-reflective gray. The ceiling also has to be a certain height for the overhead camera. And frankly, we did not have the ability here at the foundation to host something like this. So we made the very difficult decision, and for me, rather traumatic decision, to send the papers to Backstage Library Works in Pennsylvania to be scanned. And the board decided that we would start with the papers from the Chief of Staff years, 1938 to 1945, the most popular part of the collection, and that this would be a good test bed for us to figure out how this project was going to work. As I spoke with archivists and librarians in MARAC, which is the Mid-Atlantic Archives Conference, and talked about this project, they looked at me like I was nuts. They said, you want to do digitization, great, but why are you doing on the item level? Folder level is good enough. And I said, well, no, the board says we have one shot to get this. We want to get it right. And they want the documents locatable on the item level. So each individual document has its own library record. If you go to the presidential libraries, they mostly do full folder level digitization. It doesn't have really great information, metadata, they call it, the subject headings, the finding aids for what's in that folder. You basically have to scroll through the folder and find what you want. And the board did not want to do it in that manner. So this was going to be a huge undertaking. And we literally found that no one was doing what we were doing in the way that we decided to do it, and that we were going to have to invent the project as we went along. And I'm here to tell you, in library school, they do not teach you how to project manage something like this. So it has been a real learning experience. So off the Chief of Staff papers went to Bethlehem Library Work, to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, to Backstage Library Works. You can see the empty spot in the shelf. That was a really hard thing for me. I frankly admit I cried when they left. I was very nervous about them leaving, and the fact that they would be out of pocket for several months and not available for research. I had to keep a list of researchers and call them when they came back so that they could come in, because they wanted to be able to still use the collection. We made some very important decisions and choices in this project, and one of them is that we were not going to have librarians doing what we call the metadata collection, the information retrieval that is required to create a catalog record. This is an example of that. So you have the scanned document title, you have what it is, a date, a place, to whom, from whom, a synopsis, and then on the end you have the subject headings or the search terms. Frankly, so many of these documents were not full of context that I really felt like it was easier to hire historians and teach them how to library than to hire librarians and teach them how to history. That we really needed people who could read what's not written in the documents and give us incredibly specific search terms. And so I hired 5 military and government historians. There was a high school teacher teaching dual enrollment courses, a government historian, several college professors. They live from Oregon to Europe. And so we also had to figure out, how do we share these documents once we have them? Hard drives really wouldn't work. It's expensive to send them. They're subject to corruption. So we decided to park all of our documents in a cloud storage, which could be accessed by everyone, including me. I can see in real time where the historians are in their work. I can keep an eye on the quality of the work in real time and give course corrections before it becomes a big problem. And it also allows us to come together in Zoom meetings as a team, sometimes at crazy hours, but to debate and to talk about, how do we handle, how are we going to deal with some of the things that we ended up having to deal with. We discovered that there were 17 generals named Smith in the U.S. Army during World War II, and trying to figure out which General Smith was being talked about in this document was a challenge. How are we going to handle that? We discovered that, here, I'll go on to the next slide. We discovered that some documents were very, very difficult. And I know that this one probably is a little difficult to read because I chose to put up the whole document. So I will remove my glasses, lean forward to where I can see, and read for you. Well, I guess I can do it this way, read for you a little bit. Reference your letter, September 23. I do not think you will be called to United States, and we'll try to save you this trip. Stop. Unfortunately, about has arrived during distant absence of a part who will not return for another week, comma, but I do not think this will involve you in a trip over here. Stop. have just talked to about and am greatly encouraged by his report. Stop. He is working with Alamo, Aztec, and Aorta and lunches today with a lot when he will go over points raised in your letter of September 21st regarding Maxim. Okay, who are those people and what is that stuff? And it really took all of us putting our heads together and using the knowledge of these historians and the research skills that they had gained to be able to figure out who all of these code words were. Who did they refer to? What did they refer to? So we had that challenge. And then we had the challenge of some handwritten documents. This, bless his heart, in every sense of the word, is Admiral Leahy's handwriting. He was chief of staff, the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And he had the worst handwriting in the history of the world, I think. And this document was almost illegible. We put it to the team. We worked on it. They shared it with other historians at the Center for Military History and the universities where they were working. And it took about 25 people coming together, working on this document to be able to figure out exactly what it said. Consequently, this document doesn't have great searchability. So we did include a transcript of this document in the catalog record because no one can read it. So there were some challenges that way. Because we had frequent incomplete information or illegible information, we came up with what we call the not founds list. I'm paying these historians to collect information, not to do a lot of research. That research falls on me. And so anything they have that's incomplete, if it doesn't have a first name, last name, middle initial, it goes on the not found list. We discovered that almost 100% of the women were referred to by their husbands' names, and we wanted to do some reparative cataloging and restore their given names, goes on the not found list. If it just says Liberty, okay, is it a town? Is it a ship? What are we talking about here? It goes on the not found list. In working through a fifth of the collection, which is the chief of staff years, we had over 24,000 not founds to solve. And the vast majority of them came to me to solve. And it does require a lot of work, but what it gives us is it gives us a more complete library record. And it allows you to look under the husband's name, but also the wife's given name, which researchers today, I think, would probably default to the wife's given name rather than the husband's name. So it allows us to connect those. It doesn't matter which one you search, all of the results are going to come up in the library record. We also created our own control vocabulary. We decided not to use Library of Congress subject headings. Library of Congress subject heading for World War II is World War, 1939-1945. No one ever sat down at a library computer and typed that in naturally. Even librarians struggle with some of the subject headings. The subject heading for the invasion of France, which we call D-Day, is 16 words long. And so I really felt like the Library of Congress subject headings, while they do have their place and they are very good, were stoppers because we have 13-year-olds doing History Day reports. We have undergraduates who are just learning how to do research. We have a tremendous number of researchers from overseas for whom English is a second language. And so, you know, the subject headings just were not working. We've gone with more natural language. So for D-Day, we have Operation Neptune, Operation Overlord, Invasion of France, Cross-Channel Invasion, normal things that people would think of and type into a search box. So we have created our own control vocabulary. We have two lists, one of names and one of everything else. If you look, I bolded the one for George Marshall. So his main entry is Marshall, George C. But he can also be listed as any of these other things. And all of those terms are related to the original. So no matter which one of these you type, you're going to get all of the references, all of the resources connected with the search terms. We had no idea how extensive this list was going to become. Again, in 1/5 of the collection, our control vocabularies, double spaced the way they are 1,100 pages long. So it's a living document. Every time we come up with a new name or a new company or a new location, a new battle, we add it to the control vocabulary. Why this is important? Because we have people working distantly, especially. You can literally have three great librarians work on the same record, and one might say vehicle, and one might say automobile, and one might say car. They're all the same thing. But with using three different terms means you're never going to find all of the resources because some will be connected to some and one and some to another. So by having this controlled vocabulary, we always use the same phrase, we always use the same term, and it gives a consistency to the resources as people find them. So this is what the new catalog record looks like. It's quite different from the old, isn't it? What you have here on the left, you have the rich metadata, all the information about this document, from what collection it's in, what it is, the date, to whom, from whom. Because we have historians working on these, they can read a document and write a summary, which is extremely helpful to a researcher. Before they dive into a document that might be multiple pages, the summary will tell them, is this useful to me or is it not? And then we have the subject headings, the search terms associated with this document. And those search terms are all links. So if you were to click on Dill, John G., you would get all of the resources connected with Field Marshal John Dill, who was the liaison between the British Chiefs of Staff and the American Chiefs of Staff as they came together in the combined Chiefs of Staff during the war. On the right below, we have an actual scan of the document. Why is that important? Well, a transcript is great, and that's what you'll generally see at the presidential libraries. But scans have margin notes. Sometimes they have footnotes. They have handwritten notes and messages, things crossed out and changed. So it's a much richer document. And it is searchable. All of these are, they call it OCRs. They're PDFs, so they can be looked at in any kind of a format. The only caveat is that some of the handwritten documents, like by Admiral Leahy, don't have the greatest OCR. And for those documents, we are supplying, as we go, transcripts. It's a work in progress. All of it's work in progress. But this is what you have. Above the document is my favorite part of the record is Browse Folder. You can see the document, which is the bolded one there. You're also able to navigate to documents before and after. You can move folder to folder. You can even move from box to box in the collection. It is as close an experience as you can get to sitting here in the library with the folder, going through each individual page. So it gives even more context to the document. It also allows the researcher to see what was going on around it without having to create a new search, a new search, a new search. I really love this browse folder. I think all of the work has been worth it. This shows you the difference that the new catalog records have made in our library catalog. The blue line is the catalog searches per month in 2024. And the red line shows 2025 up through October of this year. The new catalog went live in March of 25, and you can see that it is consistently a higher usage. We did the average before the new catalog records. We had an average of 608 visits to the catalog a month. Now we're seeing an average of 914. So it has made a large difference in the use of the catalog in the records being useful to researchers. So of course the board said, wow, this is wildly successful. Let's go ahead and do the rest of it all at once. And I said, oh, okay. And that really was a village getting this collection ready to leave. We last January sent off 204, the rest of the boxes, 214 of them to Backstage Library Works. Left to right in these pictures here, everyone on staff helped and some volunteers too. First person, that's Tangia Tasnim. She is my assistant librarian, and I am so grateful to have her. There's no way we could do this project without her keeping the library running, doing normal library things day to day. Next person, my daughter Erin, who's a librarian, who came and volunteered that day because she was off. The middle picture, this is Alice on the left and Lee on the right. Alice has been here since 1977 at the foundation, and Lee came just a few years after that. So talk about a longitudinal knowledge of the foundation and its history. And then on the right, Lee again, but also John, who's in charge of development. So it didn't matter what hat you wore. When we were getting these boxes ready to leave, everyone helped. And this is what the library looked like with those boxes ready to be carried out of here. And I sat here for a while I took this picture from the library stairs that we have that help us access the books up above. And I sat here for a while looking at these boxes, realizing that they were going to be gone for an entire year. And that was a long time to have the majority of the collection out of pocket. And there again, it is inconvenient to some researchers. I'm still keeping a list to let people know as soon as they get back. And we have done the best we can in supplying what people are looking for while the papers were actually not here. So how do you get to the library catalog to see these wonderful records that we have? MarshallFoundation.org is the website. And if you hover over Research Library and click on Search, it will take you to the advanced search page. I helped design this page with Sutron Global, who is our library catalog provider. They are amazing. They worked with us to make it exactly the way we wanted it to. And you can see that digitized George C. Marshall papers are an option to search just the new records that are in there. At the current time, only the Chief of Staff records are there. We're working on the Secretary of State right now with the historians, and as we get sections complete, we will upload them and continue to add to what's here. But you can also look at everything else that's in the collection that has been digitized over the years. And that is my presentation. I hope that you found it useful and that we have a little bit of time here to talk more about Marshall and the library and the archives. There is my contact information. Like I said, the library and archives are open and running. You may have heard that the museum has closed. The museum did close with COVID and did not reopen. However, I have some of the cool things from the museum here in the library, including an Oscar and a Nobel Prize, a Mussolini's ceremonial sword, and a golden typewriter. And some really cool things that came from the museum. I have the Enigma machine from the museum still here in the library. And I am very available for having people come and visit. If you have a research project in mind, if you want to just come and learn more about George Marshall, I'm really happy to give a tour and to answer all of your questions. If you have some young people in your life that might like to have a chance to handle some primary sources and learn the value of them, I'm happy to have you bring them down or host them. And the email is the best way of getting a hold of me so that you can make arrangements for visits. So I am open to questions.
All right. First question. What was Operation Anvil? That was referenced in one of the documents you showed us.
Right. Operation Anvil was the precursor to what became D-Day.
Okay.
The D-Day, happened, of course, we all know, June 6, 1944. My father was there on Omaha Beach that day. He was part of the 29th, which is our National Guard unit, still in this area today. And the need for the cross-channel attack had been known for a long time. I mean, everyone's familiar with Dunkirk, right? The British tried and they got kicked off. And so in early 1942, the discussion began about the need for a cross-channel attack and invasion of Europe. But we were not prepared. When Marshall took office as Chief of Staff on September 1st, 1939, which was the day that Germans rolled into Poland, his complete army was less than 100,000 men. It was not one of the larger armies in the world. And so the infrastructure needed the finance to give the infrastructure to create a larger army takes time. And we, one of the big holdups that we had in the cross-channel attack was the ability to get ashore. We didn't have the Higgins boats. We had, you know, um, the islands in Pacific. You know, they didn't have the Higgins boats. You know, it took time to get things um, together so that we could have that cross-channel attack. So they talked about um, the cross-channel invasion, and they talked about it, and they had a plan, and then they had to change the plan to something else because they weren't prepared for the operation. So long and short there.
Okay, next question. You mentioned early on that the State Department had sent most of their records to the National Archives. So the question is, have you tried petitioning them for any post-war documents to add to the collection? And do they store them?
The State Department, of course, doesn't have the documents. I think that the National
Right.
Archives does. The National Archives is really not interested in giving up documents. Not to mention the fact that they probably are in many different record groups. They're not all together in the boxes that they were in originally. So trying to pull them together would be nearly impossible and expensive from time, you know, people time. Um, so I don't think that's going to change. Um, we um, we are lucky in that we have documents that came from the likes of Robert Levitt, you know, that he kept himself and then donated here. So we do have that. Marshall kept copies of all of his speeches during that time. And so we do have all of those, which are extremely useful in research because it's the public face of what the State Department is doing or what Marshall thought they ought to be doing. And so it gives us a lot of good insight into what was going on in the State Department at the time. So we are lucky to have those. I wish I could say that those would come here someday, but I don't hold out a lot of hope, honestly. It's disappointing. I'm sure that the State Department had its reasons. It's just, I'm not sure what they are.
Okay, next question. Are you doing any outreach now when isolationism is resurging? How do you make Marshall's achievements understandable to a generation that's often not being taught the history of World War II?
Exactly. One of the most important outreach programs we have here at the foundation, we call Teachers Institute. And it's held for a week. We had 2 sessions coming up again this next year, a week in the summer for each session. And we are inviting high school and middle school teachers to spend that week immersed in Marshall and the history that comes along with his career. And among other things, we have speakers. They have opportunities to do research here with primary and secondary resources they couldn't find somewhere else. We also have speakers come in to enlighten them and to further enrich their knowledge on topics. This last year, we talked about World War II in the Pacific specifically. And so giving the teachers this opportunity, what they come away with is they come away with a lesson plan that they can use in their classrooms. And those lesson plans are shared amongst the teachers in their cohort, but also put into a shared drive that they all are continuing to have access to so that they can access we last year we did the World War II in Europe. The year before, we talked more about the Marshall Plan. So the teachers who participate in the Institute can have access to all of these lesson plans. So that is one big outreach program that we have here. We have speaker about once a month during the academic year. We call them legacy lectures to come and talk about a topic that is not widely known or appreciated, but gives us more insight into the history, into the culture of the 20th century in the United States. I have, like I said, open late on Tuesday nights to give people an opportunity to come in and do research who cannot come during the day. I do give tours here. We have school classes that come in to learn more about Marshall. I had a computer science class here last week to learn about the code breakers, William and Elizabeth Smith Friedman, and to see how the Enigma actually worked, the code breaking, code making and breaking machine that the Germans had during World War II. So we have that. And that's the kind of thing that we're doing. Presentations like this to groups help us do some more of the outreach. We also usually once, sometimes twice a year, have one of our legacy speakers not here in Lexington. We've the last few years had a get together in Richmond, which gives an audience that's not local to the Rockbridge County area a chance to be present for the lecture. But we also live stream the lectures, so that no matter where someone is, if they have internet connection, they can watch the lecture in real time. They can also ask questions at the end of the speaker, like we're doing right now. So it allows people to really feel like they can participate in the lecture, even if they're not here in Rockbridge County. So that's some of the things we're doing for outreach.
Okay. We had somebody ask where you're located, and Steve has posted your location in the chat. So anybody that wants to know, take
And
a
how
look at
does
that.
Steve know the location? Has he been here?
Steve knows everything. Seriously, mention anything, and before you can snap your fingers, he's posted information about it.
He's also good at internet searching.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I will add to that there's a large parking lot just behind the building where visitors are welcome to park. And that we do have a set of stairs to the front of the building. And if the stairs are a little bit more than you want to try, there is a handicap entrance in the back that will bring you up the elevator to visit. So, but Steve, I like Steve. I saw Steve's description of where we are. Good on you. That's wonderful.
Okay, next question is who did the portrait of Marshall that we can
In the
see behind you?
background. So that just came back from the library to the library from the Army Chief of Staff's office. It was there for about 14 years. And it was painted by Dr. Forrest Pogue's wife. Dr. Pogue was given the opportunity to write a biography of Marshall. It turned into a 4-volume, we call it the Pogue biography. He was charged by the foundation and given a research team to go through all of the Marshall papers and also attendant papers that had at that point been donated to the National Archives. So it's possible that some of those State Department things are actually in the National Archives. Copies were made both in microfilm and hard copy of over 1 million National Archives documents that we have here in the foundation, as well as Marshall's papers. And so we have that ability to learn more about Marshall with the papers from the National Archives. But she painted this portrait of Marshall. And it was Marshall's wife's, Catherine's, favorite painting because she said that Mrs. Pogue had gotten his eyes and his nose right. That he had piercing blue eyes. And in the painting, you could just really see those eyes. Now, it's leaning up right now in the library. It's going to be hung after Christmas where everyone can see it. And I'm really excited to have it available because it's a lovely likeness of the general.
Does the foundation connect with the presidential libraries of the presidents who were in office and worked with George Marshall?
We do have connections with those libraries. In fact, I was able to do a lunch and learn from the Eisenhower Library a short while back. I do have connections with the librarians and archivists at Eisenhower and at Truman and at Roosevelt specifically, because they do have the most connection to Marshall. And we share documents and we share photos. I also work very, very closely with the Joint History Office in the Pentagon. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of photos, and they are writing a history of the Joint Chiefs. And so I've been working with them with documents and with photos that we have that they don't. I also work with researchers at the military graduate schools, Air War College, Army War College, Command and General Staff College. So there's a lot of unofficial liaison work that we do. We would like to do more with the presidential libraries. We had been talking about doing podcasts together, but then there was a government shutdown and we're not sure, they're not sure of funding, and there's a lot of upheaval right now. So they're not taking on new projects, so to speak. That doesn't mean we won't go forward with that at some point, but I think things will have to be a little more even for everyone to be able to see their way through. But I do work closely with and have great friends at the MacArthur folks over in Newport News, with the World War II Museum and Archives down in New Orleans. It's really a great collegial atmosphere. Also, of course, with the folks at Dodona Manor, Marshall's house up in Leesburg. We're not officially related to them. We're two different foundations, but we do a lot of things together because we have things that can help them and they have things that help explain what we have.
Okay, we've got a comment here. This person said they're shocked to hear that some schools are not teaching much about the history of World War II. Do you have a sense for how widespread that is?
Well, from learning from my husband, who's a high school teacher, and learning from the teachers who've come in for the Teacher Institute, because the vast majority have a test to take at the end of the year, at the end of the course, the students have to take a test. They end of grade testing, they have different names for it, but it's a standardized test. So the teachers have to cover all of the material that's in the test. It doesn't give them a lot of leeway. And there's so much to cram in during a limited time, that things like World War II get short shrift, sometimes 2 or 3 days. And you can't cover it in that. There's no way that you can cover any topic in depth. And I think what really has happened is that these history courses in schools have become survey courses. They're not really learning anything in depth. And for those of us who, when you went to college, if you weren't a history major, you had to take a certain number of survey courses. It's just skating along the top of history. And I find that to be a shame. Marshall found it to be a shame too. He said that the one thing that young people need to be steeped in is the history of the past so they can know how to live for the future. That's paraphrasing him, but that was the idea that he had.
Do you work with the Army Center for Military History?
I do at times. In fact, one of my historians working on the metadata part of this project was doing postgrad work at Center of Military History, and now she's crossed over to the Navy. We lost her from the Army now. But I do a lot of times, an email will just come and say, what do you have on? And that is how we make the connections, and I can share what's available here. I had during the shutdown, there was a silver lining for me. I had the commander and assistant commander of the National Defense University come down to visit because they weren't at work. And they had no idea what we had here. And so making inroads with more professional Army education. I got an email from the chair of the history department at West Point. What do you have that my students can use? So while they were on this downtime, these men and women were not just sitting around staring into space. They were looking at, how can I use this time unofficially to find out what's out there for my students? And so that's how a lot of times these relationships begin. It's just a question of, I'm working on this particular topic. What do you have?
Okay, just a heads up, we're about 7 minutes to 11. And our next question is, what do you wish Americans knew more about regarding the accomplishments of George Marshall?
He was a very self-effacing person. He really was an introvert with a very public life. He did not care for, although he had to do things like interviews for the newspaper and public speaking. It really wasn't naturally who he was, and it was not something he really enjoyed. And at the end of his life, he was offered by the American Overseas Press Club in 1949 $1 million, which in 1949 was a heck of a lot of money, and this gold-plated typewriter to type his memoir, to work on his memoir. And his response to that was, what I did was few, far between, and relatively unimportant. Who wants to read about that?
Hmm.
He didn't care how history saw him. He didn't prepare his career to be digested by historians the way some others did. Um, Maybe I should mention names. Maybe I shouldn't. MacArthur certainly cared how history saw him. Patton certainly cared how history saw him. Mark Clark cared how history saw him. Marshall didn't care. And consequently, he almost got lost. And it really didn't matter to him that, he didn't foresee that's what would happen, but it really didn't matter to him that he become part of history. That's not why he did the job. And so learning about this man who was an incredible leader, who trusted his subordinates to the point where he said, "Don't call me at night, tell me the next day what you decided to do," who believed that you had to get out from behind the desk and see what was really going on to be able to make wise decisions, who understood that you give people the power to do their jobs and get out of the way and only help when they ask for it, who understood that sometimes you have to relieve someone from a position, even if it's a friend, and do it anyway. These life lessons, the lesson of work-life balance, that he mastered, that it let him do 2 terms of chief of staff during a world war, when 1 term is usually enough for burnout during peacetime anyway. I think these are lessons that we can well use today.
Okay, well, you answered my question about the golden typewriter, so I don't need to ask that. How did his troops feel about him?
Well, let me speak from personal experience. My dad joined the 29th in 1940. In 1941, they were federalized. In 1942, they went over to England to start training. And they were chosen to be one of the units on Omaha Beach on D-Day. They were a green unit on D-Day. They had never heard a shot fired in anger. You all have seen Saving Private Ryan, right? I think that's a pretty good indication of it. My dad's personal opinion was that Marshall was a soldier's general. One of Marshall's most famous quotes is, "I care that the soldier has his pants." And that seems a little silly, but in Europe, the weather was changing into fall and the winter uniforms were not ready. And you know what happens to an army that doesn't have winter uniforms, right? We all remember what happened to Napoleon in Russia. And so Marshall was literally at quartermaster saying, "Get the soldiers their uniforms." 6 days after D-Day, Marshall and the combined chiefs of staff and Prime Minister Churchill were in Normandy. Did you know that? 6 days after D-Day, completely incognito. Marshall stopped, the convoy that Marshall was in had to stop because there was field artillery fire up the way. And there were infantrymen walking along the side of the road, and he stopped them and he started talking to them. And I don't know exactly what he asked, but I bet he asked a week after D-Day, "Have you had a hot meal yet? How's your ammunition holding out? What kind of shelter do you have?" And the infantryman's question, "Are you taking care of your feet?" That was Marshall. And that came across. It came across that he cared that the soldiers be taken care of, that they have everything they need to do this really horrific, impossible job.
Can you recommend 1 or 2 biographies about Marshall?
I can. I'll recommend 3. First, one by Mark Stoller, and that's Markstoler. He wrote a short one about Marshall. It is a great way to get your foot in the door. It's the one that I read over a weekend before I started working here, so it's not a huge expenditure of time. The seminal biography is the 4-volume Pogue biography, Forrest Pogue, Pogue. It is available as an ebook that is basically out of print, but there's still used copies out there. And then the more current biography that was published in 2017 by David Roll, Roll. Those are 3 the best. There's a lot more out there, but I think those are the 3 best. Mark Stoller's is if you don't want to spend a semester reading. The 4-volume biography and David Roll's. David Roll's is thick like a Harry Potter book. So those are more of an investment in time.
All right.
What
Well,
is the title of Mark's book? I can see the cover, but I can't remember. Use my email, send me an email, and I'll or if you all have the ability to be in touch with everyone in Arlington Neighborhood Village. If you'd like, I can send you the information and you can share it amongst everybody who would like it. I'm sorry, I can't pull the titles out of my head.
come on, Steve, don't let us down.
And I'm not going to be rude and start Googling things while I'm sitting here
Working
with
on
you.
it.
Steve's on it.
Okay, well, Melissa, what a fabulous history lesson we had this morning. It's too bad we didn't have more people to enjoy all of the information that you provided. That was really very, very helpful. So thank you so much for enlightening us about the life of George Marshall. It was also interesting, your comparison to other more popular and well-known generals during World War II that we finally know more about the Marshall Plan and George Marshall. So thank you
Well,
so
and
much.
thank you. And I'm happy to share what we're doing here in the library to make Marshall more available, so that from the comfort of your home, you can see all these documents.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the book title is up in the chat.
Yeah,
20th Century American Biography Series, George C.
thanks.
Marshall.
Thanks,
there it
Steve.
is. That's right. Plus, you live in a lovely little town. My husband and I have traveled to Lexington a number of times, and it's very delightful. Lots of things to see and do and walk around. And I'm sorry, the last time we were there, we did not come to the library, but we'll be back. So
Well, and I just will throw out there, it's a nice day-long field trip if the Arlington Neighborhood Village wanted to take a field trip.
yeah, the only thing that's always a pain is driving down, I think the major highway 81 or something like that with all the trucks.
Honestly, I would come down 2964
Okay.
and just take the last little bit of 81. But there's nothing to say that maybe you couldn't find a sponsor to run a bus.
Well, there it is. There it is. So anyway, thank you, Melissa.
Thank
And
you very much. I hope you all have lovely holidays. And
thank you.
maybe I'll get to see you again.
All right. All right. So, and be sure and tune in next week for another history lesson. This time we'll be talking about World War One living history with Michael Bosworth, who is the journey of naval engineer Michael Bosworth. And he's going to, he founded the very popular Ships Company Shantymen, Sea and Tavern music performing troupe. So that sounds like another interesting topic for coffee and conversation. So have a good week and stay warm. And we'll see you next Wednesday at 10 o'clock. So